You know, years ago, there was a rather new student to the teachings of the Ascended Masters and to the Temple of the Presence, who was very enthusiastic until he came across the last verse of this decree. Shining moments brief no more, Moria's vision restore, rising, rejoicing at his call. To him I vow, I give my all. And that last line did him in. He just could not conceive of giving his all away to anyone, even a perfect ascended master. Well, we have news for all of you who are here, that this, the Temple of the Presence, is an ascended master activity. It is not a plebiscite of the mass consciousness that would like to fashion an activity after its own mortal image. As an ascended master activity, it belongs to the ascended masters because it is their ascended master presence, their light, their love, poured forth lavishly into your world and the world of all torchbearers, and as well distributed far and wide across the face of the earth. Their light has made this activity possible. So it does belong to them. And human opinions notwithstanding, no matter how forcefully they might be held, no matter how proudly, no matter what the dubious collective wisdom of the current age might be, an ascended master activity must be guided by and conform to the self-same laws that the ascended masters live by. There is no compromise with this. There is no lobbying, no ability to water down the truths of the law or the practice of the truths of the law. If the ascended masters are to continue to use the activity as their very own. So for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness or in health, we have one and all plighted our troth to that glorious wedding banquet with the ascended masters. And you yourselves will be most joyous that this is true, regardless of what changes there may need to be within your own personal lives to embrace the precepts of cosmic law that the ascended masters live by. As their anointed representatives, if it's a choice between having multitudes of people who are going to flock to this place and enjoy beating their drums and having their Indian sweat lodges and the whole gamut of things that go on in the New Age, if it's a choice between that and having a few lively stones who are the stalwart and true, courageous ones who are able to stand with the ascended masters, stand with their mighty I Am presence, and come up higher in the standards of the ascended masters. That is the only alternative open to us. And it is really and truly the only alternative open to the torchbearers of the temple. You are in good company when it comes to this steep path of Christhood, although you might not know it so very well. It would take an Encyclopedia Britannica to chronicle the lifetimes of austere discipline and purity lived by beloved Master Moria, lived by Kuthumi, by Hilarion, by Serapis, by Saint Germain, by beloved Zarathustra, by Lord Ling, by Elijah, by so very many of those who are now ascended, who prior to their ascension, not yet having benefit, as you do, of so many of the niceties of the violet flame and the power of invocation, nevertheless, they were able to pass through those times in which they lived and hold to the purity of the truth of cosmic law in how they lived their lives. For them, it was like, there's 1,001 different similes or metaphors that come to mind, such as taking a plunge in a cold ocean or river when there is an initial chill, but then there is a bracing vitality that comes along with it. Or the climb into the upper rare atmosphere of a mountain peak, where, yes, the oxygen may be a little bit thinner than it is at sea level, but it is also so very much more free of effluvia, and it is, the very space is pulsing with the essence of prana and the pure ethers of God's consciousness. So this is the steep path of Christhood. The reward for that is freedom, the freedom of your heart flame and of your life stream. The reward for that is that you clear away the debris, which allows the purity of the light to flow forth through your four lower bodies and through the spiritual centers that translate to conscious feeling or conscious thought, to pour forth in a way that enables you to feel as if you are already standing in the heart of the great central sun, wearing your ascended body, the electronic body, in the ascended state. This evening we are going to touch rapidly on a number of those specific fetters that have plagued you, your life stream, unbeknownst to you. They have been hidden stumbling blocks that actually, in many cases, have stultified the progress that you would, the rate of progress that you would have wished for your life stream. No one is saying that as you strive to comply with the letter of the law of these things, that the accumulation of however many embodiments have been there is going to vanish in a moment, or that this acceleration of the four lower bodies in vibration and frequency until they are really able to be fully enveloped by the Christ presence. No one is saying that that will not require a degree of patience on your part. But your heart flame will know. And you will find joy because you will have that inescapable sense that your path is straight and secure, and that so long as you maintain that path, you are on that steep vertical ascent into the heart of your own beloved mighty I Am presence. Many of these fetters that we are going to speak about will be the identifying of the impersonal, universal action of certain laws of life. Don't blame the anointed representatives for the fact that these laws exist in the universe. Don't blame the ascended masters. Don't impute some moral overtone or moral imperative to them in one sense, because they are simply the laws of life. St. Paul said, the strength of sin is in the law. Sin was the misqualification of and the perverted use of certain laws. It's true, continuing on with our analogy of mountaineering, that unfortunately from time to time, life streams stray too far and fall to their hurt or to their death. And one might say, well, falling is bad. Therefore, we should outlaw gravity, pass a legislation, and decree that henceforth gravity shall be null and void. In fact, many so-called teachers and many so-called students, not liking the results of cosmic law, have argued against God and with themselves and with their teachers, their true teachers, that these were not the laws of life. But, brothers and sisters, these laws are, as the saying goes, immutable, changeless. They are the way life is constituted. They come forth from the presence, from the one. They come forth through the great central sun. And although there can be a mitigation of those laws through mercy and transmutation and so forth, that mercy does not ever annul the original principle that caused the possible harm. It is the way that things are. So let us begin then with some of those fetters, one of which is the tendency for there to be a defiance, a rebellion, in the form of judgment, in the form of criticism, condemnation, and judgment. Of course, this should never be practiced against anyone, but especially it should not be practiced against God, blaming God. Of course, no one in our activity is going to be so foolish as to actually do that or to blame the ascended masters. But they might well decide that they can sit in judgment upon the message transferred by the anointed representatives and sit in judgment both on the message and the messenger. So I'm going to cite for you just a few precedents of these points which have been present as a part of the teaching of the ascended masters since the very beginning. With the passage of time, past eras take on a wonderful patina of aging, of a certain glow. They take on a glory. They take on a sense of halcyon days gone by when all was ideal as contrasted against the present time. Here you have beloved Saint Germain, the great divine director, and others Sanukumara especially, giving forth the pure, unvarnished principles of cosmic law about things that limit the students. And the first one that we're going to take up is that general category of criticism, condemnation, and judgment. Still your outer expression often, for your outer self needs obedience to the great inner light. Therefore, whenever you detect the impulse surging to argue or criticize, or you feel a tightness by way of a resistance within you, that is your signal that the human self is intruding itself, demanding attention. This is the time, by the power of your free will, to command that outer human self to be silent and submit in obedience to the mighty I Am presence. Again, if the student feels critical or curious, inquisitive, out of harmony towards any person or place, it is a sure signal that the outer ego is acting. The proper attitude is to correct that, to arrest it immediately. Everyone, and especially the students of the light, must realize that they have one thing to do: to feel, to see, and to be perfection in all areas of their worlds. Therefore, if there is lurking back somewhere in the consciousness feelings of resistance of any kind, if there is that which is always on the moment ready to bristle when something displeases, pluck that momentum out by the roots. You know it to be of the outer, and it will stand in the way of your attainment and prevent it until you do pluck it out. Now, there is a number of elements that are brought forth here: argumentation, criticism, defiance, that bristling energy, which is really a form of irritation. And for all of the good that Ascended Master students are doing, you should be able to monitor your own interactions with one another as you serve together and as you socialize and so forth, so that you do not feel the need to rise up in defense of yourself, or that there would be these scarlet flares. Scarlet is not ruby. Scarlet flares of anger, impatience, and irritation that still have a tendency to come to the fore, even in the interaction with students, one with the other. Many individuals have found this to be the case for themselves, and they arrange all of the affairs of their life so that basically they always are not put in the situation where they would rub elbows with other people who might irritate them, who might provoke them. They may seek employment where they can work alone. They may arrange their lives so that they are more or less on their own. One of the advantages to the probationary path as it relates to world service is that as individuals come together and have to work with each other, if these momentums are there below the surface of consciousness, they are sure to come out, because people's worlds are like that game at the arcade known as bumper cars, where their auras bump into each other and the sparks seem to fly. Far too much of this still does have a tendency to act within the life of the students, and no one should give themselves permission to indulge in righteous indignation, whereby they feel as if they have a justification to do this. Sometimes it is due to irritation and impatience. A lot of times, for whatever reason, there is still in the outer self not the sense of a divine self so powerful or so complete, so that the outer self subconsciously may well feel inadequate, and it must come to its own defense. It must champion its own correctness in every situation. In the process of throwing up that defense mechanism, like the squid or the octopus, it vents its cloud of anger, or even worse, as a defense mechanism. You don't need and you should not allow any of that to be present in your world. In the mystic rose of the ecclesia, if there is enough violet flame surging through your life stream, here we are ideally going to be magnifying the immaculate conception of one another's perfection in the mighty I Am presence, and affording one another the grace to do this. This traditional triplet is CCJ, criticism, condemnation, and judgment. And as much as that phrase has been bandied about for decades, still there are any number of people students who do give themselves permission to judge one another, as well as, in some cases, judge the messengers and anointed representatives. Here is how this was put by the masters during their first ascended master activity. Here is Saint Germain speaking back in 1937. I congratulate you, blessed ones, on the expansion of your light in spite of the seeming chaos which at times seemed to be in your midst. Steadily and surely, you have gone forward in the greater and greater expansion and perfection of your presence, which is your mighty I Am. In your future work, remember that we are always pouring our radiation to you, and where there is harmony in your world. But we cannot pour that forth where there is no harmony. To those who refuse to give obedience to these simple things we ask, we cannot give more of our radiance, for without obedience, nothing can be accomplished. Furthermore, we dare not release great volumes of light and energy into the use in the four lower bodies of a student unless we are sure that they will not requalify that light with riptides of anger or of criticism or hatred or any of those qualities which are destructive. One day you shall discover how great is our love for you, how earnestly we watch over and guard everyone. When the messengers are prompted to warn you and guard you, please do not feel that in doing so they are attempting to interfere with your free will at any time, for such is not the case. But they must convey the truth. Always remember, they will stand by always to give assistance. Beloved ones, your very heartbeat is a throb of life, life, life. More and more and more life. As you gain in greater understanding and feel your authority to call it forth from your mighty I Am presence, stand guard that as it flows forth, you do not requalify that light. Now you might say, how is this possible? Well, ascended masters' light cannot directly be requalified. But ascended master light is also radioactive, spiritually speaking. And when it passes through your world, the energy of that ascended master light is absorbed by your four lower bodies. In addition to which you have the light of your own mighty I Am presence. And the law of octaves is very uncanny in that when that light and energy is transferred within the memory, mind, emotional, and physical bodies, it is then subject to how the free will of that life stream qualifies it in those forms. And so if you want to have the power, the unmitigated power of your mighty I Am presence flow forth, prove to your presence that you can be trusted to use its light in all cases harmoniously. Prove to your presence that you are attuned sufficiently and wise enough with your presence to not engage in these momentums that are part and parcel of the memory, the soul consciousness in the memory body that has acted so automatically for so very long. Once again, beloved Saint Germain, early on made the following statement: no longer will mankind be able to destroy each other by blaming persons and places for things that exist within their own feeling worlds. When mankind humanly cannot have their own way, in most cases, they turn vicious. As an illustration, there was a student in Los Angeles who has spread falsehoods concerning the messengers. This person wished to be received into the staff, to become one of the White Fire Corps staff. But because they saw that which was within that person, which could made that staff position impossible, this person was refused. From that time on, he turned vicious toward the work, toward the activity, and toward the messengers. This is how mankind, thwarted in their human ambitions, become vicious. That is unfortunate for them, for I shall say to the whole world how untruthful it has been, and all others who have attempted to slander the beloved messengers. Here is how the great divine director went on to explain this point. And here, the context leading up to this had to do with criticism, condemnation, judgment, and one of the other, I'm reminded of the image from, I believe, Macbeth, double, double toil and trouble, cauldron boil and cauldron bubble, where the three witches are stirring their brew. And another part of that brew is all forms of gossip, all forms of slanderous, negative statements made. And here is how the great divine director explained what takes place when there is that kind of negativity focused against the light and the ones who are carrying the light on behalf of the ascended masters. You will pardon me if I use this expression. This was, again, Great Divine Director, 1938. You will pardon me if I use this expression. Stubborn human self that will not yield and respond to the impulse from that one's higher mental body must be given our assistance in order to let the impulses of their own presence come through. When we pour our light and radiation, that is our means of rendering assistance. And then we are able to work on the stubborn rebellion and resistance so that the power of the presence can eventually get through and render its service. Now, basically, did you follow what he was saying? He was saying that due to the law of octaves, where you have a karmic situation, you have the Christ presence, you have the mighty I am presence, and you have this rebellious outer self that will not bend the knee to its own God presence. And therefore, much as it would like, the God presence and the Christ self are not able, or the Christ presence are not able to get through. Ideally, what is supposed to happen in those situations for a student on the path who is tied to the ascended masters as a disciple of the ascended masters is that in that emergency situation, that is when the ascended master desires to give their ascended master light into the hands of that Christ presence, so that the Christ presence can use the light of the ascended master to give protection to its own outer self. That is the emergency lifeline that the masters would always wish to pour forth. Now, Great Divine Director is going to put that in context. Now, do you realize why in the classes you feel so wonderful? You feel so much at peace and restful. You feel as though you could accomplish anything. It is because in the overshadowing of the ascended master's light during the releases, there is the arresting of your own four lower bodies, your own human momentums, so that those are held in abeyance and you feel the flow of your God presence and your mighty I am presence through you. That has made it possible for the currents of energy from your presence to flow forth without being requalified by anything. On the other hand, when individuals who have engaged in gossip or criticism, condemnation, judgment, enter into the classwork, the services, criticizing and condemning, they come with their own thought and feeling world already churning in the turmoil of their own human feelings. And in that state of that turmoil, they are incapable of receiving our light, even if it were to save their lives. It is impossible. This is the impersonal law of life, which I am citing to you, the law of your very own life and of each one's life. Those who therefore desire to revolve discord, to find discrepancies, to voice something and find something wrong, they will find it, because the wrong is within their own consciousness and feeling, as far as they must look out at life through the lens of their own thought and feeling world. And therefore, they are only able to detect that which is within themselves as vibration. Their feeling is in their desire world, and they only desire that which is within their own feelings. That is why those who are out of harmony, even should they enter into the class work, would not receive anything except to become more and more uncomfortable in the services. And if anything, they will remove themselves out of the services because of the uncomfortability that they feel. Therefore, and this is Saint Germain again, students and individuals should look within themselves and find wherein they have been unnoticed those subtle things that are still binding them. Each one should joyously open their heart to the truth that reveals to them the things which need to be remedied. Any rebellion within the consciousness, and that is where hierarchy comes in. If hierarchy gives you a problem, if the fact that there is an organized structure to the Ascended Master activity that comes down from the Ascended Masters themselves, if there is a sense of rebellion within you about that structure, put it down as the great offense against God, the mighty I Am presence. Long ago, when Saint Germain was in embodiment as Samuel the prophet, Saul came to him, King Saul, with his human rationalizations and justifications for why he had disobeyed the directive of God through Samuel as the prophet. And Saul said, well, I have disobeyed you because I decided it would be better to keep these things that you told me to get rid of and use them to make sacrifice. And Samuel made that very powerful, immortal statement, obedience is better than sacrifice. So here, St. Germain is saying, any rebellion within the consciousness should be put down as the great offense against God, the mighty I Am presence, so that there may be nothing to interfere with the penetrating rays of the great light. I have tried to impress upon your minds from time to time that it is not a matter of personalities, but it does mean that to enter into the truth and to live the truth is of all importance. One of the most subtle forms of rebellion is concerning our own little personal habits that we have formed through the many centuries. Therefore, just as you would pull the weeds out of your garden, so should you pluck these habits from the outer consciousness. Pull them out by the roots, that they will have nothing left by which they may grow. Moving on with some of the other elements that constitute the fetters. In a sense, one of the ones that is most problematic has to do with the conservation of the mother light, the conservation of the sacred fire, and the raising up of that light in adoration back to the mighty I Am presence. Hopefully all of you will understand that this, again, you are again reminded that this is an impersonal law of life. The sacred fire is what will be your chariot of fire that turns the human being that you have been into the divinity that you are going to become. It is due to the fact that it is the most concentrated focus of God's life and light with which you have to deal. And it operates through all of the four lower bodies, not only through the physical form. In fact, the four lower bodies during incarnation essentially operate as one whole identity. There's so much feedback and giving and receiving and influence of each upon the others that for all intents and purposes, although we distinguish them for the reasons that you know of, they really do interact so much that you can't really isolate the action of the light in one body from the other bodies. Earlier today, we pinpointed the fact that due to the turning down of the light and life and the attention of mankind in past ages, it produced the fall of man and produced the weak human beings that we are, that are the victims of circumstance rather than the captains of their destiny. We identify the fact that the densities entered the chakras, including those spiritual centers within the physical body and within the mind and outer brain structure of the individual, that caused those bodies and those organs within the physical mind to actually vibrate so slowly that the life stream is spiritually deaf and not able to hear and not able to see. And the heart is more or less closed. Those three things that were identified by Isaiah and referenced again by beloved Jesus, as you heard on Palm Sunday. You want to know this, and you want to gain the mastery over this, because it is part and parcel of your freedom. Let me share with you how beloved Sanakumara brought this instruction to the students of the earlier activity. This was back in 1937. Mankind quite often rebels at obedience to certain simple things in life, but it is that very obedience which means the attunement of the brain structure. There are certain ingrained habits in mankind that have prevented them from receiving these higher vibratory activities that would have already given them the knowledge they sought and the freedom they sought. Hundreds of thousands of people who have sought the truth of the law of life, but all the while they have continued to practice the human habits which have created that very density within the brain structure and prevented them from receiving the truth. Therefore, mankind have only received the light of the great law at intervals, and then, even then, only slightly. He first mentions the use of tobacco produces a secretion which will not permit the attunement of the brain beyond a certain point. Mighty Victory warned that other kinds of mind and mood altering drugs also left that deposit on the brain that would not allow the light pattern of the physical brain cells or the inner etheric double to resonate to the higher use of the light. It goes on to say that the violent meats will also fill your atomic structure, now notice this carefully, will fill your atomic structure with fear. That is because of the fear that is charged into the body of the warm-blooded animal during its butchering. It's also due to the fact that those animals, by definition, are themselves the condensation of millions of years of thought and feeling acting on elemental life and bringing them into dense physical bodies, just as it was described how mankind originally had much freer, finer etheric bodies, but now have physical bodies. He goes on to say, if you waste your sacred fire energy for the pleasures of gratification, then in doing so, you carry out of your body the very energy from your mighty I Am presence, which you must have in order to maintain the courage and strength to call the presence into action and hold to that presence until the whole series of human qualities gathered about you through the centuries are dissolved and disappear. That's an association which Sanakumara makes. The wholesale misuse and waste of that light results in the depletion of courage, strength, and confidence. Did you ever notice that people who are profligates in their waste of this energy become fearful, become weak, and they are filled with distrust and suspicion? Because in the outpouring of that life, the pouring out of it in waste, It wastes the very courage and strength which would have already gathered within the feeling world of the individual. This waste of that sex energy that the individual throws away, his courage and strength, for that is that which goes out. It is the liquid light which is intended to fill the nerves and pass along the courage and strength of life, which is feeling. Now, it is true that ordinarily that is considered to be something that transpires in the physical body. But it was just pointed out to you that the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the memory, these are all in a feedback mechanism with each other. And that light is intended to come down through the bodies, through all of them, and go back through the bodies in a return current back to the heart of the mighty I Am presence. So in both directions, it passes through the mind and the feelings. And it is intended to convey that stamina, not just a physical muscle type of strength, but a moral fortitude, as well as a peace and a harmony and a strength. In other times, we have explained to you how the shape of the chakras is distended by that wholesale misuse of that light. The chakras are intended to be convex. They are intended to be radiating suns where the light comes down and goes out, thrusting out and creating helping to supplement the tube of light in the electronic circle. But when that light is misused in this way, it creates a concave sucking action rather than a solar wind going out. And so people feel very vulnerable and at the mercy of whatever happens to be passing by at inner levels. He goes on to say, this energy was intended for the propagation of the human form. The great mistake which the sinister force has seized upon, hypnotizing individuals and teachers and channels among mankind, making many believe that it was perfectly fine for mere gratification. They have used every possible excuse to make individuals feel that they could use it for that recreational pleasure and still go on to perfection. I say to you, beloved ones, this never, never, never can be. Let the encouragement of that mistake through various avenues and the excuses that many teachers have made because the desire is strong with them in them. This is one of the greatest of all tragedies besetting mankind today. Beloved Saint Germain has requested that I bring this to your attention today with my power and my radiation, that you might understand it clearly. May it enable you to release all feeling that you do not wish to cease any of these habits which bind you. If any of these things, whether it is any of those contaminants that would slow down or coat the mind and brain, if those desires are strong, do not struggle against it. Do not fight against it. Simply make the call, mighty I Am presence, take these things out of me. Take this desire from me and replace it with your satisfaction and your perfection. And then go on making the call regularly and go on serenely on in your daily activity. And then, when you least expect it, all of a sudden you will find that that desire has simply melted away. You may use the same call to free yourself from any other desire, whether it is alcohol or tobacco or drugs or the violent meats or any of these things. Dear ones, you are many of the life streams from Poseidonus come again. This time your victory is sure if you will give this simple obedience to these great but yet simple laws. That is why you must control your life energy, the sacred fire. It is not that you should not use this activity for procreation. That is quite all right, even if you have attained to a very great height. of attainment. It is the waste that is the tragedy for mankind. Your energy is given to you to hold contained within your vessel of your four lower bodies, that you may have it for use. Before I go any further along in this regard, I want to bring a note of comfort to any of you who are in a relationship where your partner may not have the same zeal for the purity of the path that you yourself have. There is not the time tonight. I'm not sure when exactly we will have the time, but I refer you to beloved Hilarion's heart and his instruction on this subject, which is found in the 7th chapter of the first book of Corinthians, where he talks about the sanctity of marriage, of how that is a sanctified relationship, and of how those who find themselves in that sanctified relationship may in good conscience give consideration to their helpmeet and not feel as if somehow or another this practice is of continence is going to be something that they need to break up their marriage over. That doesn't need to happen. No one needs to have a sense of condemnation or helplessness about it. Meditate upon those words. Repair to the heart of beloved Hilarion, to the heart of beloved Mother Mary, and also remember the instruction that was given earlier. In your calls to your presence, in your calls to the mighty I am presence of your beloved, you send forth the light and call for these conditions to be adjusted. And every time the situation comes to your consciousness, you make the calls again. And you make the calls again and again. And so long as your heart is in the right place, and God will, of course, know that, things will arrange themselves as they should, without you having to cause pain or suffering to anyone else in that regard. These are related matters, but they are not the same. But nevertheless, that is the principle of cosmic law. You have the right to know that that is the golden precept. You have the right, as students of the light, to realize that of the many, many things that could be brought up as elements of the path, none is of more potency for good or for ill than this particular one. Because in reality, when that light is conserved over years and decades, and it is redirected back to the heart of the mighty I am presence, it weaves a stronger tie to the mighty I am presence and creates a downward flow and an upward flow of the caduceus action along the spinal altar that is in anticipation of the intensity of the light that needs to come forth through the transfiguration and the resurrection. So really and truly, it gives liberation to those who are wise enough to know, to embrace that precept for themselves. It is, as are all of these precepts, between you and your mighty I am presence, you and your ascended master sponsor, and if you, in this instance, more than most others, in the case of the sacred fire, of course, between you and your marriage companion and beloved, to where you work that out with them at the same time. There are quite a few references to this, instruction on it, to be found in the Magic Presence in the chapter in which Saint Germain gives instruction on the great God flame and the twin flames. Now, in addition to those, we're going to touch upon some others of these fetters as they relate to the students, all the students of the light. In the Theosophical era, where there was not the full understanding of God individualized, not the full understanding of the glorious causal body rings around the electronic body of the mighty I Am Presence, there was the idea that some of the higher subplanes in the mental realm and the higher subplanes in the emotional realm were sealed off from impurity. Saint Germain came along and stated unequivocally that there is no good thing that is present in the astral plane or in the psychic plane of the world. I will hasten to point out that that is a reference to the 6 lower subplanes in the emotional and the 6 lower in the mental, because the 7th, the highest, which is known in the East as the Tanmatra, is really a reference to the white fire core that is, by definition, beyond ability to be misqualified in any way whatsoever. But wherever you have activities that go on in those lower subplanes, you have problems to deal with. In the case of the mental world, there he talks about the psychic strata. There is nothing good or permanent within the psychic strata. It is as dangerous as quicksand and just as undependable. The psychic plane and the outer activity of the mind and feelings, unless they report perfection to you, are one and the same thing. They are the creation of human sense consciousness, the accumulation of human thoughts and forms energized by human feeling that contain nothing whatsoever of the Christ. In and amongst those fetters would be any hankering after phenomenon, any hankering after the opening of the spiritual centers into the intermediate realms, below really the level of the electronic body. Anyone who has a need to penetrate into those realms, to see, is curious about what is going on there, is going to find, not maybe initially, but eventually they will find that there is an opening of that consciousness that comes into their world. And as that comes in, the harm, that one of the greatest harms is that it overlays a layer of psychic substance onto the spiritual centers that are to be open all the way to the mighty I Am Presence. Forgive me for using this analogy, but if you can imagine what it is like inside the inside of the drain pipe in your kitchen sink, that is a good analogy to the psychic energy that flows back in and coats the chakras when it is allowed to enter one's world. And the effect of that is that there may be some ability to detect what's going on mentally, psychically, emotionally, and so forth, get little flashes and glimpses of things that are going on in these levels. But by coating the chakras, it is like the scales that would blind the eyes and stop up the ears and harden the heart. It makes the life stream deadened to the true spiritual vibrations that come from the Ascended Master Octave. Astrology, numerology, all of the many trendy things that go on at psychic fairs, all of these kinds of things fall short of the ascended master octaves. In reality, your attention is always to rise all the way into the heart of your own beloved mighty I Am presence. You don't even pause at the level of the Christ or the causal bodies, but you are to go all the way to the I Am presence and know yourself to be that presence in action in the world of form. So it is very tragic when those things are allowed to pour back into one's life. Sometimes they come in because one of the other fetters is called curiosity. And you will notice that there is an italicized paragraph tucked into the latter part of the magic presence that warns against curiosity, because it is basically gluttony of the mind. It is the outer mind that thinks it's gonna, what if it doesn't know something? What if it misses something that it might like to know? And so it really is this pry bar that would like to go into these intermediate realms and root around in there and find out what's going on there just out of curiosity. I think Eve had a taste of that when she wondered what the apple might taste like. And we all know what happened after that unfortunate event. So psychicism in its many forms dulls the spiritual senses. What is in some ways so very insidious about psychism is that just like this cave of the density of the memory body that comes subtly upon the life stream as the light of the consciousness of the God presence dims so gradually, so too the psychic energy silting back in doesn't come with like a ton of bricks, like noontide turning into midnight, but it comes in so gradually that the outer consciousness is not even aware that it has been polluted with that psychic energy. And so there is no knowledge that one is trapped in that energy, and therefore there is no desire or ability to say, this is something that I should eliminate from my life. And for individuals who have opened up their chakras through whatever type of forcing of the spiritual centers from beneath, whether it be through different forms of hatha yoga, psychedelic drugs, whatever it might be, sitting for channeling or any of those things, when those things force the chakras in that way, and there is a yen for it. There's an appetite for it, all of the various phenomena that are associated with it. Those are the people where the mercy of the law is that they come back as strict materialists for 2 or 3 or 4 lifetimes, to where they don't believe that there's anything but the physical earth plane. And that is by way of a mercy of the law. So that over the term of that 3 or 4 embodiments, this psychic energy will be weaned off of that yen for the psychic energy. And it will be gradually through life experiences of, it will be come back and will be experienced as pain and suffering or whatever manner. And that pain or suffering will expiate the energy, and having been for having a momentum of 3 or 4 embodiments as an atheist or a materialist, then they'll be free of that yen and can begin the path once again. So psychism in all of its forms is to be avoided at all costs. It is the serpent that winds around the tree of life. It is the Sodom's apple that looks so juicy and red, but when you bite into it, it's full of dead spores. How can I make it as distasteful as possible? It is nothing that you want to have any flirtation with. What is quicksand, by the way? Quicksand looks firm. It looks like nice green grass, nice place to maybe recline. And as soon as you step out onto it, you are caught in the morass of that energy. So enough said about psychism. It is a bane and an anathema. It is where all of the peepings and mutterings of the psychic imposters of the true ascended masters are present. So many of those who should be your brother and sister torchbearers didn't find the temple of the presence first. They found this or that or the next peepings and mutterings of those pipsqueaks, Saint Germains, erstwhile ascended masters who were born out of that psychic realm. And it doesn't usually take too long for a true heart flame or a light bearer to be disgusted by what comes forth out of those things. And so when they hear about anything about Saint Germain or the violet flame or these things, they say, oh, I know what that is, because they've had just enough to inoculate them against the real teaching of the ascended masters. The other one that I want to touch upon, which is related to criticism, condemnation, and judgment, but is not the same thing, is that which is known as gossip. Gossip. Years ago, back in Vermont, in the middle of a discourse, we declared the Temple of the Presence a gossip-free zone. And there was a standing ovation from everyone in the congregation as that declaration was made. Oh, that we can hold to that momentum at the present time. Here are some of the ways in which that form of gossip is referenced. And by the way, you may take the instruction of beloved Saint Germain in that little theosophical volume entitled At the Feet of the Masters. One of the 4 fetters that are identified there is gossip. And he talks about it in terms of what it does to the individual. He talks about how it is a radioactive contaminant that charges space and jumps from one person to another. And then he points out that the itinerant gossip wants to make a co-conspirator of everyone else that he can draw into that circle of gossip. Here is how Saint Germain has identified that momentum. For any student to yield and lower himself to vicious gossip is a violent retarding process to his or her growth. It matters not what may seem to be the appearance. No one may sit in judgment upon another. Those who yield to such childishness open wide the doors of their worlds and to forces far more destructive than the boa constrictor in the jungle or the tiger that would tear them to pieces. For they would but destroy the outer form, while gossip, criticism, condemnation build and build within the mental bodies that revolve them, that very destructive element which may take embodiments to rid themselves of. The one who spreads gossip, and here he makes a very important distinction, factual or inaccurate. Gossip is never truth. It might be factual as it relates to the outer experience world, but it is never in agreement with that which is to be found in the heart of the great central sun as truth. So the one who spreads gossip, accurate or inaccurate, not only injures themselves, but shuts the door to those who unfortunately may accept the gossip and dwell upon it. Anyone who yields to it should understand how far-reaching it is, the injury which they may do to themselves and their acquaintances. Conscious pouring forth of divine love in all such situations will enable anyone addicted to such a habit to find quick and complete release from such conditions. Here's how the great divine director put it. Even though there may still be some residual accumulation of human consciousness in your feeling world, that is no reason why it should longer govern you. Fortunately, there have been many in your surrounding who have been strong enough to refuse to listen to gossip. And I mean by gossip, all that which is less than the perfection of the mighty I Am presence. Because, after all, everything else is but gossip. Gossip is perhaps too gentle a term to use. Nevertheless, only as a person sees that, not as a personal thing, may they free themselves. It does not matter what condition may be in the appearance world. It is not a matter of people or personalities, but it is a matter of a force that is acting through them, of which they may be aware or unaware. Or else they have something which in their feeling world causes them to become an easy instrument of its use. I assure you, beloved ones, make yourself more firm than ever. Refuse to listen to gossip. Charge your world with divine qualities instead. And if your mind begins to revolve those qualities, then your world will be charged with them, and you must reap the results. A few more things to add to this principle of gossip. You might recall, I believe it was in the Prince of Denmark, Hamlet's story, how Hamlet's unsuspecting father was having an afternoon nap when his enemy came along and poured poison in his ear. That is symbolic of gossip. You might recall in the story of Othello, how Othello was married to an innocent wife who was loyal and dutiful to him in all ways, but there was someone who was the enemy of Othello, who chose to work his wiles by gossiping, pouring poison into the ear of Othello about the unfaithfulness of his wife, which eventually drove Othello to kill his beloved for when she was completely 100% innocent of these things. I do not have the time, but I can tell you this, that as it relates to judgment, as it relates to criticism, one life stream to another, whatever course of action follows as a result of that gossip, the person who passes it along, or the person who originates it, person who brews it and foments it, they are tying themselves to whatever eventuality comes of it. Nowhere is this more serious and grievous than when it comes to the Ascended Master activities and the honor of the anointed representatives, where an unsuspecting life stream believes that they have a person who is presumably in the know or in trust, who voices gossip, who voices judgment to someone, and if that were to deter that other student from the path, then the one who initiated that cycle has just bought stock in the outcome of that recipient's karma. And they will be tied to the whole chain reaction of events that transpires, like how the dominoes fall one after another. They will be tied to that life stream whom they have deterred from the path, and will have to somewhere, sometime, serve that life stream until at least that life stream is brought back to the point that they were on the path when they were deterred from the path. There are statements about this made by beloved Jesus. They appear as well in the book of Revelation. So it is a matter of great consequence and something that none of us should practice towards one another whatsoever, but especially as it relates to an ascended master activity and those who are carrying the banner for the ascended masters and answer directly to the ascended masters. This is a great fetter. One of the things that happens along the way when individuals allow themselves to sit in judgment of the representatives of the masters is that that very judgment means that no longer can the ascended masters lead that student through their messengers, because they have invalidated that trust that would otherwise have been present, that would have allowed them to engage in that guardianship by the ascended masters through their representatives. Some of the other elements that are fetters along the path: human sympathy. We don't have much time tonight to talk about sympathy. We have talked about it in the past. I will cite for you the words of beloved Nada on this subject, given in The Magic Presence, where she points out that the performance of physical acts for the satisfying of the human consciousness of other life streams is not divine service, but rather it is slavery to mortal consciousness, and it is the vain treadmill of ongoing repetitions that continue on and on. Sympathy, in its many avenues, is present throughout the world. So much that goes on in mankind's relations with each other personally and in the governments of the world are based upon a focus on the mortal consciousness of the outer self. And it is not that there should not be a divine compassion, but there is a sympathy and compassion are as different as light and darkness, as night and day. Sympathy fixates on the outer appearance and actually pours more energy into reinforcing the plight that one is in. Divine compassion gives the compassion to the mighty I Am presence and the Christ presence and the embodied heart flame. Divine compassion looks to the authority of the I Am presence and the Christ presence of the life stream and takes its direction from that which the I Am presence and the Christ presence wish to do. We have already established the principle of spiritual blindness. Karma blinds. Karma binds. And in that hardness of heart and that deafness and blindness of the outer self, it makes it very difficult for the Christ presence to actually impress upon the outer consciousness where that outer consciousness is going wrong. And there are times when no other avenue is available to the Christ self except that which is known as the Catholic medicine of necessity's ray in one form or another. It causes necessities to come upon that outer life stream so that it looks around and asks the question, what's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why are these things happening to me? And only when it looks and cries to God for help and poses the question, why are things not working? Only then can the Christ presence speak through that. So if the God presence of an individual prescribes this medicine, it is not for any other part of life to dash the medicine from the cup which the individual will have to drink, in order that they may have the freedom that comes from the confrontation of that necessity. Another way in which this sympathy acts in the world today is in the fact that individuals, and I'm speaking now not so much of light bearers or those on the path to the ascension, but the multitudes of the millions of life streams on this world, they are given a dispensation of so much light, a fixed dispensation of life and energy that is intended to last them the whole of their embodiment. And unless there is a great deal of progress that is made, and there is actually an extension granted by the Lords of Karma in conjunction with the authority of the I Am Presence, if there is not such an extension, then when that allotment of life and light is utilized completely, it is the plan of the presence to draw up the heart flame back into the higher vehicles, to go through the devaconic recapitulation of the good of that lifetime and begin again, to begin with a fresh new opportunity, with a new birth. As Saint Germain says, nature takes a hand and breaks the impasse between the outer life and this inner life. It means looking at things from the vantage point of the true self, the mighty I Am Presence. What has happened in our world today, with all of the medical advances in science, is that any number of ways have been discovered in which to bring people back from the dead, literally, and to keep the physical body alive, and do all kinds of things that will essentially keep the vitality of the physical form going, when it may well be that that allotment of energy and life has been used up, and the I Am Presence is ready to move on. And this is where it becomes very problematic. Now, don't jump ahead, say that this is an argument for any kind of drastic measures to be taken unilaterally. But it doesn't change the fact that many people have sound bodies but unsound minds, because the light of the consciousness, remember Saint Germain said long ago, it's by the light of the consciousness of the I Am Presence that you know who you are and where you're going, and have the integration of memory. And when that light is used up and is drawn up, the physical body may still be there, but the presence is ready to move on. So if everyone is going to fixate on the fact that death is this final act of doom, gloom, and beating of the chest in mourning, rather than simply divesting oneself of a dense outer vehicle and going on with life eternal, then that sympathy will be the human quality that perpetuates things. And there is so much done in the world today in the name of that kind of sympathy. We're running out of time without even scratching the surface of the number of fetters that there are. Superstition is another biggie. The idea of believing things that are the common pattern of lots of other people that are not based in reality whatsoever. Doubt is very insidious. Fear is very insidious. The list of these goes on and on. In all cases, we return swiftly back to the violet transmuting flame. In all cases, we remind ourselves that it is not the desire of the Ascended Masters for even one little goose down feather's worth of condemnation to fall upon your blessed life streams or your hearts. Not one feather's worth of self-condemnation should you impose upon yourself. Just simply be glad that your eyes are open, that you know what's been holding you back. Simply be glad to know that there is the violet flame that is the antidote for that malady, that the violet flame will go in. It can and will, through the light that it flows into the physical body, it will deal with the impurities that have been put into the body in the past. It will deal with the slowing down and the density of that physical, emotional, and mental body, start accelerating them and accelerating them and accelerating them more and more so that they can contain in harmony more and more light. That is the joy that should come to each and every one of you, because at last you know who you really are as the I Am Presence, God individualized. That is your selfhood. Who you are not, which is that outer ego, no matter how sly and insidious its pretend, its masquerading may be to be the real you. No, to be able to distinguish the still small voice of your heart as your mighty I Am Presence prompts you through the heart, rather than the many clamoring voices of your mental body or of your emotional body, as those vehicles seek to pretend to be the real self and to have a legitimacy about themselves that they do not. Oh, that you now know that you are that your mighty I Am Presence is not just the absolute, but that it is the individualized presence of God as a being as well as a power, and that that is the identity whom you are, and that the part within you that knows that with a certitude is that very mighty I Am Presence. And as you seat yourself in the pink, blue, and gold plumes of your threefold flame, and hold your conscious connection and attunement with your mighty I Am Presence, you will find that together with the help that the Ascended Masters can render those who follow this steep path, that you will be able to say to these conditions one after another, you have no power. Call the light of the presence down to put in the place of every one of those conditions. And that it will not be so very long until you are experiencing that childlike purity and innocence that begins at the level of your Christ presence as well as your mighty I Am Presence. And you will have that unbreakable thread of contact with your Ascended Master sponsors, and that they will shepherd you safely through all of the many pitfalls of this world into the Ascended Master octave. Torchbearers of the temple, if you can accept this standard of the golden precepts, embrace it in your prayer closets, in your private communions with your mighty I Am Presence, if you can afford the same forgiveness and grace that you would have for your life stream to your brothers and sisters on the path, so that we, each and every single one of us, are holding that vision of perfection for one another. If you can say to Master Moria, to Kuthumi, to all of these masters who have themselves lived lifetimes on this steep path, that you are ready to run the race of life with them in this way. You will be the lively stones that form the foundation of the temple of the mighty I Am presence, as that is the ascended master activity that will go forward to become the instrument of the ascended masters for the dawning golden age. Are you happy to be a part of that activity? Yes. No crocodile tears for the human self? No, none whatsoever. We don't have time. I didn't ask for it ahead of time, but we should get out Roy Rogers and Dale as they sing Happy Trails, as we bid sayonara to our human consciousness and say, we hope not until we meet again, but we hope we never meet again. All right. Give yourselves a break. And we'll see you back here in a few minutes. Thank you.